Legend of Total War here, and today we're going to be doing a tier list using Tier Maker. This time I'm going to be covering the entire history of Total War as a tier list from a subjective perspective, starting from 2000, the year that Shogun 1 came out, all the way to 2023. 2024 hasn't quite happened yet, so that has been excluded. Anyway, before we get into the tier list itself, I do need to let you guys know that this video here is sponsored by Manscaped. So you guys know I've been with Manscaped for ages now, love the product, love working with them. They're a big supporter of the channel. In the latest live stream, you guys definitely noticed that I had given myself a buzz cut. Well, I had used the Manscaped razor for that, and these razors are just multi-purpose. They're for really any hair on your body, whether it be your head, your beard, your back, your balls, your butt, wherever it is you want some hair removed, Manscaped razors are pretty good at dealing with it. So if you check out the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, that really comes with everything that you'll need to make yourself presentable for quite a long time. You know, some good men's care products in there. So if that's something you're interested in, check out the link in the description or the pinned comment. Get 20% off plus free international shipping. And big thanks to Manscaped for once again sponsoring this video. It wouldn't be possible without them. Okay, with that being said, let's get into the tier list itself. I'll give a little bit of context before we start placing any of them anywhere. I first played a Total War game in 2005. That was Medieval 1, which I purchased for $10 at a post office. And I thought the game was pretty good. So good that I purchased its sequel, Rome Total War, which had come out the previous year. And absolutely fell in love with Rome Total War. Became a super fan of Total War then and got absolutely hooked. I became a YouTuber in 2013, and this is the last 10 years are where I'm pretty intimately familiar with what the community mood is like during those years. I wasn't intimately familiar with the previous years. So 2009 is where Total War was added to Steam, and so I imagine that's where the online community really started to grow. And when it comes to these years here, I have to come from personal experience with people that play those games. I had friends that played these games in those years, and also just by reading like the Wikipedia pages, seeing what the reviews were saying on those years, and also talking about sort of like the legacy that each Total War game and each year that had on the overall franchise, because there's been ups and downs. Some of these years have been fantastic and some of them have been very bad. And so this tier list here will cover all of that. So starting with the year 2000, this is the genesis of Total War with Shogun 1. I can only really place this as a fantastic year because the game was good enough to spark a franchise that has lasted a quarter of a century, almost. And Shogun 1, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this game when it first came out, because there was nothing like it when it first came out. It really redefined the RTS genre and added it's essentially its own genre. Because Total War in many ways doesn't have a competitor. It definitely does, but doesn't have a direct competitor that offers a similar gameplay to it. So Shogun 1, the genesis of Total War with the Total War 1 engine, very janky game, especially in 2023, but for the year 2000, this was a really fantastic game. In 2001, only the expansion for Shogun 1 came out, which would have been the Mongol invasion. I don't consider that a noteworthy event. In fact, I imagine most people who played Shogun 1 probably never even touched the Mongol invasion, because it was kind of an ahistorical mini-campaign where the Mongols invaded Japan, which didn't actually happen. So I'm going to put this as nothing happened this year because it just wasn't noteworthy. It's not like Creative Assembly does absolutely nothing for that year. It's just nothing noteworthy happens. I ran out of space. I was going to put nothing noteworthy. Just so much space I could put in there. Anyway, so Mongol invasion, 2001. Not a bad year. Not a fantastic year. Just sort of a year that just comes and goes without anything noteworthy happening. Then in 2002, Medieval 1 is released. And while Medieval 1 is a better game, in my opinion, than Shogun 1, it's 2 years later and it hasn't really furthered the franchise that much. It's using the same technology. It's really just a mod of Shogun 1. This was the game that brought me into the franchise, but looking back at it and looking at the reviews, most people will say that it was a good game for sure, but it's starting to fall behind in technology. And obviously Creative Assembly listened to that and massively improve their technology for the next launch. Now, in 2003, it was just the expansion for Medieval 1. That was the Viking invasion. This is a a Total War campaign that I didn't play until like 2015 when I found it at like a EB Games for like $1 or something, because I just never went out and looked for it. I just happened across it by accident. So I'm going to put this as nothing happened this year because it just, like its predecessor's expansion, just wasn't noteworthy. Now, of course, there's going to be some people who say, but that's my favorite campaign. That's cool. I'm sure that's going to happen loads of times, but in terms of what this year does for the franchise, it is not noteworthy. Then 2004 is the launch of Rome 2. This is really what put Total War on the map, in my opinion, but it does have a bit of a side note to it. So I'm going to put this as fantastic year because it's Rome Total War. How could you not put Rome Total War as a fantastic year? All of my friends that were playing Rome Total War in 2005 when I introduced them to it, they all thought it was absolutely fantastic. But I think it's important to note that Rome Total War was a very expensive game for Creative Assembly to make, and it actually kind of bankrupted them. Even though it was their highest selling game, the game just blew out of budget, and they needed a bailout, or else it could have ended Total War in 2004. A lot of people don't like that this happened, but Sega bailing out Creative Assembly is what created Medieval 2. So if it wasn't for Sega, Medieval 2 never would have happened, and none of the other great Total War games that came afterwards. Also, none of the bad Total War games would have happened without them as well. So you can hate on Sega all you liked, but in many ways, they saved Total War back in 2004. So I know I've personally given Sega a lot of hate in the past, but after I found that out, back in like 2019, I found out that Sega bailed out Creative Assembly, that they were about to go bankrupt. I've since given Sega a bit of a break on all this, because there's been good and bad, and honestly, I would take the bad if I can get the good because of it. Anyway, 2004, Rome Total War, fantastic year as far as I'm concerned. You know, could have been the end of Total War, but it wasn't. Then in 2005, this is just where expansions for Rome Total War came out. And I do believe that the expansions for Rome Total War are better than the previous expansions. So this is the Barbarian Invasion and the Alexander campaigns. I don't really care that much for the Alexander campaign, but I quite like the Barbarian Invasion campaign. So I'm going to put that as a good year, because we're riding off good times in 2004. These were really good times. I mean, I really should have been studying, but I didn't. Instead, I was playing Rome Total War and its expansion, and subsequently the mods that came afterwards, like EB. Okay, then in 2006, this is where Medieval 2 came out. Now, I'm sure many people are expecting me to put this as a fantastic year. However, Medieval 2, when it first came out, was a bit meh. It was like good. You know, it was clearly a mod of Rome 1. It furthered the franchise a little bit, but it was also bug-ridden, and it wasn't as good as what it would eventually become. Now, Medieval 2 came out in late 2006, and what really catapulted Medieval 2 into superstardom, something that Barbarian Invasion didn't do for Rome Total War, is the Kingdoms expansion for Medieval 2 is the most content-rich expansion that Creative Assembly has ever done. They've never beaten it. And that is what put Medieval 2 on the map. This is where Medieval 2, in my opinion, surpasses Rome 1 and became my favorite historical Total War game, to which it remains that to this day because of the Kingdoms expansion. It added 4 new playable campaigns, a host of fixes for the base game. I remember notable pathfinding issues where all the units would just go up one ladder. Even if you were scaling various different ladders and had loads of ladders up on the wall, they'll all just go up one ladder. A bug that seems to be coming back in. Anyway, I'll get back to that in a bit. But yeah, so many fixes came in 2007 for the Kingdoms expansion for Medieval 2. So I'm very much fond of 2007 for Total War. And in 2008, this is a year that just nothing happened in Total War. There was no expansions. Creative Assembly was probably working on their Warscape engine on their next game. And so nothing happened this year, nothing noteworthy. We were living off good times. So the first 8 or 9 years of Total War, pretty damn good. 8 or 9 years of nothing bad happening, truly, I think that's a pretty good run. And their winning streak basically ends in 2009 because they get their first really bad launch. first of quite a few. So Empire Total War. Now, I'm not here saying that Empire Total War is a bad game in 2023. I'm not here trying to say that. Even though I personally am not a fan of Empire Total War, I'm not trying to convince you that Empire Total War is a bad game. But what I am going to convince you of is that 2009 was a shit year for Total War. This game on launch was fucking trash. It was so bad that I was totally put off from playing other Total War games. When Napoleon Total War came out, I didn't even look at it. I completely turned off from Total War because of Empire Total War. This is the first time that Creative Assembly ever had to issue an apology for a Total War game. So I remember Mike Simpson stating at the time, Mike Simpson being the game director, who I have a lot of respect for, by the way. Anyway, he said at the time that he had quite a few copies of Empire Total War that he was supposed to give away to his friends, and he didn't do it because he was so embarrassed by the bugs in Empire Total War. Now, to be fair to Empire Total War, it did add the whole map, added a whole bunch of theaters. It was the biggest campaign map. It added gunpowder warfare. It added naval warfare. Naval warfare was pretty good in Empire Total War, but the land battles were just so janky. The AI was so bad. The units just were so unresponsive, especially when it first came out. This was not a good year for Total War, and they had to recover from this. So in 2010, they definitely made a sizable effort into doing that by releasing Napoleon, which fixed a lot of Empire Total War's problems. So Napoleon, I'm going to put that as a good year because the bad taste in the mouth of many people that was left by 2009 was in many ways washed away by Napoleon, because that was a good game. Had a good narrative campaign, improved naval battles, improved field battles. The soundtrack is way better. It just, everything that Empire does, it does a bit better. The only thing it doesn't do better is big campaign map. Empire Total Wars is much bigger because it's got the whole world. Well, this has just got Europe, essentially. Anyway, moving on to 2011. This year is the year that Shogun 2 came out. Shogun 2 learned from the mistakes that they made in Empire Total War. I remember an interview with Mike Simpson. This goes in Fantastic Year, by the way. Mike Simpson's the game director for Shogun 2. And I remember him specifically arguing with Sega for more time to develop this game because they didn't want a repeat of what happened with Empire Total War. They wanted this game to be polished on launch. And it was probably the most polished launch of any Total War game. And the legacy of Shogun 2 persists to this day. So fantastic launch, which they were able to support very well. I will also note that this year lives a little bit in infamy because it also brings in the genesis of the fucking Blood Pack. So I kind of want to put this down a tier just because of that, because the Blood Pack is absolute cancer. But whatever, I'll give it a pass because Shogun 2 was so good. Anyway, so Shogun 2 goes in there. And in 2012, they introduced Fall of the Samurai, which is a standalone expansion, or even a saga game as it was retroactively added. But it's a fantastic addition to Shogun 2, or a fantastic addition to Total War. And in many ways, it does the gunpowder warfare that was attempted in Empire and Napoleon and perfects it. It does it really well. So what you've got here is an example that Total War games can work in the modern era using gunpowder really quite well. So they really improved their technology with that. There was a bit of gunpowder in base game Shogun 2, but Fall of the Samurai really takes it to the next level. So really good year for Total War. And this is kind of the pattern that starts to happen now with Creative Assembly, is that they have a really fantastic year or have a series of fantastic years, and they think, oh yeah, we're doing a great job. We can't do anything wrong. And then 2013, a year that, again, lives in infamy. It was only 4 years since Empire Total War, and a pattern of about 4 to 5 year behavior starts to emerge here with Rome 2. Now, again, with Rome 2, I'm not trying to convince you that Rome 2 is a bad game in 2023, but if you're going to sit here and say that this game didn't launch like an absolute piece of shit, you weren't online during 2013. I was there at ground zero. I had pre-ordered this game, and holy crap, I've never seen a community just go be up in flames, at least up until recently, like it was in 2013. Now, the thing is, I was an apologist for Rome 2 back in the day, because this is when I became a YouTuber. I was growing a lot from Rome 2. So even though it was pretty obvious that the game had some serious friggin' problems, my channel was growing so much from Rome 2 that I was actually enjoying playing it just because it had like a side benefit for me. And like in hindsight, I can sort of recognize that that's why I was enjoying the game. When I go and play Rome 2, and like if I was to go play the launch version of Rome 2 today, oh my god, I would not enjoy it whatsoever. It was so bad. So this is another Total War game that required an apology from Creative Assembly and required them to spend the next few years rebuilding community goodwill, which took them a little bit longer this time. So in 2014, there was no major launch of a Total War game. Instead, it's just DLC for Rome 2. For the most part, not too bad. But they didn't really reach any high points. They didn't pull a Napoleon and just fix community goodwill. There was a lot of negativity within the community, which was well-deserved by Creative Assembly. And a lot of the DLC coming out in 2014 kind of wasn't very good. You know, a lot of like crappy race packs, and there was some good like campaign packs, I suppose. But I would put 2014 as a mixed year. It wasn't really bad, but also wasn't really good. Very forgettable year, and it definitely wasn't a year that nothing happened. So I'm going to put that as mixed. And then in 2015, this is where Attila comes out. Now, Attila is essentially a sequel to the expansion for Rome 2. It's the exact same setting. It's the barbarian invasion. Now, it didn't sell anywhere near as well as Rome 2, which could honestly be expected. It's just not as popular as the classical Rise of the Republic, or Rise of the Empire even, time period. So I'm going to put this one here as mixed. It didn't launch too badly. Didn't launch as badly as Rome 2, but it did have a lot of criticism. It's not one of my favorite titles by any means. There's a lot of things that Total War Attila does right, but there was also a lot of community hate towards Total War Attila, especially in regards to optimization. You know, this game being developed for future hardware. Well, guess what? I've got future hardware. My computer was made in 2016, and it still runs Attila like crap. And in fact, many people have complained that their builds from 2023 still run Attila like crap. So that was a bit of bull crap from Creative Assembly, and you start to really see the cracks in their honesty. They kind of just tell a lot of bull crap with some of their statements. I really don't think that Total War Attila was made with future hardware in mind. It just wasn't optimized, and because it didn't sell that well, they needed a escape to just get out of like developing it. You know, it got a little bit of development time, and then they just moved on. In fact, they continued developing Rome 2 beyond 2015 when they sort of gave up on Attila. So that's that one there. And then we have 2016. Now, this is the genesis of the fantasy side of Total War. So this is the launch of Total War Warhammer, which was not fantastic, the launch of it. It wasn't bad. It was definitely better than Total War Attila and Rome 2. I'm going to put this, it's definitely not a nothing year, I'm going to put this as a good year for Total War. This is where it starts to recover. Warhammer Total War, the first one, had a lot of problems, but it started to see some like good DLC patterns, you know, starting to. And this is where Creative Assembly was starting to figure out what they're going to do for like the next few years. So I think the launch of Total War Warhammer was overall a good year, and they were still supporting Rome 2 during this time as well, so I think it was good. But it definitely wasn't my favorite Total War game at that point, as was the case for many of the community, because it wasn't really the full Total War Warhammer fantasy that it would eventually become. And then we've got 2017. Now, 2017 is where Warhammer 2 is launched, and so you'd be like, oh, it's your favorite game, Warhammer 2. Surely you're going to put that as fantastic year, right? Right? Nope. Going to put it as good year, because the launch of Warhammer 2 was okay. It furthered the franchise a little bit, but it wasn't the fantastic game that it would eventually become. You know, Mortal Empires, when it launched, was pretty damn buggy. The DLC that really started to make it great happened a lot later, much in the same way with Medieval 2 becoming better over time. So that was the beginning of it. It was a good year, I think, for Total War, and you know, there was more to come. And then we have 2018. Now, this one here, this 5 years after the Rome 2 launch, this is what I'm talking about, that 5-year pattern with Creative Assembly. This is interesting because there was some good stuff that happened this year with Warhammer 2, but this is the year that Thrones of Britannia came out. And I'm going to put this as Total War died a little this year, because although there was some good DLCs for Warhammer coming out, their best DLCs, except for Tomb Kings, which actually came out this year, maybe I should put this in mixed. Yeah, I think I should put this in mixed, because there's some good and there's a lot of bad. So Thrones of Britannia was not a good thing for Total War. You know, very few people liked it. It this is where they started to really strip the games of features and try to sell it to you again for a cheaper price. This is the genesis of the Saga franchise, which really does not have a very good legacy, in my opinion. So 2018 has a lot of mixed things to it. Some good stuff with Warhammer 2, like you got the Tomb Kings DLC. I think at the end of the year we had the Vampire Coast DLC and some good stuff in between. They were really starting to get their stride with Warhammer 2, but on the historical side of things were going downhill quite massively in 2018. So that was not great with Creative Assembly. Then we've got 2019. Now 2019 is the launch of Total War 3 Kingdoms, which was fantastic. Probably not quite as good as Shogun 2, but really a step up from what came before. And a lot of really good DLC for Total War Warhammer 2 was coming out. So you've got a good launch on a historical Total War game that sells really well, and some good DLC coming for a existing Total War game. So overall, fantastic year for Total War in 2019. Then in 2020, another fantastic year for Total War. Now, this one here is a little bit more complicated because you've got bad DLC coming out for Three Kingdoms. You've got great DLC coming out for Total War Warhammer 2, and you've got Total War Troy's launch on Epic exclusive. Now, say what you want about Troy, and I'd probably agree with you, but the Troy deal for Creative Assembly was a stroke of genius because it was free. Okay, you can't complain about a bad game if you got it for free. Total War Troy is not a good Total War game. You know, another crappy Saga game 2 years after the previous crappy Saga game. But it was free. Obviously, if you didn't get it for free, well then you probably hate it more than I do. But got it. Most people, I think, got it for free. 7.5 million people were introduced to Total War thanks to Troy, and probably didn't retain much of it. But there is a lot of good that happened for Total War in 2020, and it all goes downhill from here. In 2021, this is a mixed year. There's some good DLC for, I think there's one DLC, the Silence and Fury for Warhammer 2, the final DLC. And this is where the infamous Future of Three Kingdoms happens, where Creative Assembly cans Three Kingdoms because they'd made crap DLC that wouldn't sell, and they wanted to basically sell you the same game again, except that they ended up canceling it anyway. So mixed year, and then they launched Troy on Steam, which didn't launch particularly well, but that's because most people already had it on Epic Game Store. So very much a mixed year with 2021, and it really was sort of a sign of things to come. And then we have 2022. Whew. I don't think there is a year that I dislike more than 2022. Total War died a little this year. Warhammer 3's launch was awful, and they have not really recovered that much since then. Like, Warhammer 3 has been chugging along okay since, even with Immortal Empires, it has not reached the high points that Warhammer 2 was able to reach. Even after DLC launches, the player count isn't as high as what it was with Warhammer 2. There has been a lot of really bad behavior from Creative Assembly in 2022. They ended it on an okay note, but the launch of Warhammer 3, that was as bad of a launch as Rome 2 in terms of the community outrage. And then in 2023, it was even worse. So another bad year for Total War. The past 2 years for Total War have been fucking terrible. So in 2023, there have been shit DLC for Total War Warhammer, except for the Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs. That was okay. But then you've got Shadows of Change. And then you've also got Total War Pharaoh, which is the worst launch of any Total War game. Not in terms of outrage. I mean, it's got mixed reviews on Steam, and it barely sold anything, so it's got very low player count. Now, I do believe that 2024 is going to be a better year because they've just had too long of a shit run. This has been the longest shit run for Total War that we've had ever, because these other years, they only lasted for 1 year, but we've had 2 shit years in a row for Total War. And this was coming off the back of a pretty good streak. And it just went straight from good times to crap times pretty damn quickly. But there is a lot of room for improvement. You know, Warhammer 3, there is still a lot of interest there. If they can manage to fix things up with Shadows of Change and do really well with with Thrones of Decay, then 2024 could actually end up being a good year. I do not think it will be a fantastic year. I think that the next major historical Total War game will probably come out in 2025. And probably be announced this year, and who knows? Maybe that will be the genesis of another era of Total War. Who knows? But the last 2 years have been pretty bad for Total War, from a community perspective at least, and from my own enjoyment in Total War games. I don't think if I was a YouTuber, I probably would have turned away from Total War because of the past year. It just hasn't been good on pretty much any fronts. Pharaoh, Troy. There's been basically no historical Total War games except for Pharaoh, which just isn't very good. And the fantasy side of things has been very badly neglected. But at least on the mod side of things, people are still producing good quality stuff, especially SFO and Old World mods and various others. So the community is mostly being kept alive by the community, not by Creative Assembly. Anyway, that's the end of this tier list here. So overall, Creative Assembly and Total War has had more good years than bad years. But most of these years were the early years, and most of these years are the later years. So that's not good. It's a bit lopsided. So hopefully the next few years are going to be good. But like I said before, Total War seems to have a 5-year like historical cycle that started from 2009. You got 2009, 2013, 2018, 2022 bad launches. So the next bad launch is likely to be 2026 or 2027, unless Creative Assembly breaks this cycle, which I hope that they do. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Let me know in the comments what you think of this tier list, whether you agree or disagree. Totally fine if you disagree. If you disagree and you feel like leaving a dislike, go right ahead. All up to you. I'm here to give you my opinions, and if you don't appreciate it, that's fine. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to check out Manscaped. Link in the description. Later, guys.